Hey, so we're talking about W.I.J.D. What is Jesus doing? Who here did not get a bracelet like that? And you want one day? Yeah. Okay. We're working on getting more. They had another order that they put in, so they're going to bring us some more of those. But yeah, this is a series that we're actually talking about in the Impact churches, so Impact London. Just if you got any Mennonite friends or any friends, they don't have to be moving to Nova Scotia. Like there's a lot of people moving up that way. Bridgewater, there's a great church. You got to send them there. Yeah, Impact Church, Bridgewater. They're up in Nova Scotia. So, and then also we have church in Toronto and in London. So. It's a lot of fun. So we've been talking about like this. This is the series that we're going through, and we've been communicating and talking about, hey, what is Jesus doing? It's not, a lot of people that have the idea, what would Jesus do? So every circumstance they come to or any decision they need to make, what would Jesus do? Like if we're not sure, eh? So I'm going to ask, where is God today? I need some serious answers. Where is God? Where? Here? Yeah. Is it possible to know the will of God? Why? How? Why? He speaks to you. But how? How does he? Do you wait for a wind that kind of sings a tune over your head, or a bird that sits by your window and tweets something to you? Wow, I just thought of a tweeter. Wow, there is Twitter. Wow, I'm not on Tweeter. I'm starting a new one. Tweeter. From the Tweety Bird, I'm going to use the yellow one. But how? Like, how is he? Is the voice in your head? I doubt it, Peter, man. Some of the things that you hear, I'm not sure if that's God. Like, can't be. Through his word? Okay. Yeah, I like that one. I like that better. I don't like Peter's head. He's got... He tried. No, it's all good. Man, there's something I thought about this morning. Like there's a verse in Corinthians where Paul says that you have... who here has heard that term? Who knows the will? Who knows what God has prepared for those that love him, right? Right? So it's basically like you just make sure you love God, and then somehow it'll work out, or it might not work out, but you just make sure you love God. That's kind of how the idea. But you get that, like, who knows? Something happens. I'm driving down the road. I get a flat tire. I got to pull over. Well, who knows what God has got in store for me, because I just, as long as I love him, and then something will happen, right? Actually, you have to read a little further, okay? You read to the next verse. It actually says, but... we do know the will of God. That doesn't say exactly that, but he says, but we have received the Spirit of God, right? So you have the will of God inside of you. You do not need to go running around looking for the will of God. You have it inside of you. And you know what? It is actually true. He will speak in your character. Because if it's out of a different character, it's an unfamiliar voice, right? And he says, my sheep hear my voice, and they will know. So a lot of people, they're looking for an unfamiliar voice out there to speak to them. And I'm like, actually, that's not the right one you want to look for. You want to look for that familiar voice inside of you, because why would God speak to you with an unfamiliar voice when he's inside of you? Does he not know you? Does he not? Like, wow. And then it says, you have the mind of Christ. So there's that oneness there, but hey, I got to keep going because I'm just going to preach off on something else. But we're doing about Jesus is doing something. So Peter talked about Jesus is doing unmiraculous miracles. Unmiraculous? Did I say unmiraculous? Unusual. I got to mix my words up today. Hey, so we talked about this last week. Pastor Carl shared a little bit. Like, hey, we're going to talk about the Samaritan woman when Jesus is with the disciples. So this story starts off that in John chapter 4, it starts off saying that, hey, the Pharisees or the religious leaders of the day, they recognized this guy is gaining a lot of followers. And then it says immediately. So it's just like he's just had to leave town because the Pharisees recognized what was going down, right? So I don't know if he felt like, okay, I better leave town for a bit because I'm going to get in trouble, or they're going to start a riot or whatever. Because he says a lot of them were getting baptized, not by Jesus himself, but by his disciples. They recognized that he was getting more followers than John, right? John the Baptist. But anyway, so he says, so he left Judea and went back once for more to Galilee. So they're heading back to Galilee. He says, now he had to go through Samaria. Something I thought was he had to go through Samaria. And so you have to understand, if you're not familiar with this, maybe you've heard it a million times, but the Samaritans, they were a mixed breed of the pagans from way back that had moved in. They had taken over Jerusalem because Samaria was the capital of the Jews for a time. And then the pagans came and took over. There was an evil king that took over and everything. But then the Jews left, but some stayed behind. All right, and then they came, and then they mixed with them. They married with non-Jews and different things, and then the Jews sent leaders to the Samaritans. They were trying to convert them. They were trying to get them to go to Judaism, and then they instead of them accepting just the Jewish way of life, like what God had told them from the beginning, right? They accepted it, but they mixed it with the other beliefs, with the pagan beliefs. So they were just like, oh yeah, we'll just add it to our batch of gods, right? They did a whole bunch of mixture of weird things, right? So these were people that the Jews did not like. These people, they hated these people. They just did not. There's even one commentator that said that the Jews actually would say, there was a quote that they said, they wished that the Samaritans would not resurrect on the resurrection day. That's how much they hated him. It says, I hope they do not resurrect. Like, they was just like, they are just the outcast, right? It's kind of like our Mennonite background from way back, right? We lived out secluded in our little villages, and we were just like hoping that, I hope those people don't make it to heaven. We're the only ones that are making it there, right? So that's not that far from that. We're familiar with that idea. So, but I find it interesting that Jesus was intentional. You know how he said, hey, we need to go to the other side, right, to the lake, and they took the boat, and then they went to the other side, and then they met the one demon-possessed man. He says, I need to go to the other side, and that's the only thing that happened there, and then they came back, right? So Jesus was intentional about what he was doing. He says, I have to go through Samaria. Even though the normal route was always around Samaria, it's not that he was trying to take a shortcut, because apparently they could save 3 days by just going through Samaria, but that was a big no. But the disciples decided to follow him, right? So he says, we had to go. And then he encounters this woman at the well, right? He says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? And then something I thought was interesting. So Jesus sends the disciples to go into town to get some food, right? Nobody ever talks about the disciples, their experience, right? They talk about Jesus and his experience with talking to a Samaritan woman. First off, you're not allowed to speak to women. Second, a Samaritan woman was even worse, all right? So, but nobody talks about the disciples. They had to go into town and go shopping. Just imagine how it really grinded against their thinking. So first off, they hated these people. They never went to this town. This was a place they would never go to. Now they're shopping in their town. Must have been awkward, must have been this group of guys just walking through town, getting some food and stuff, and it's just everybody's like, what are these people doing here? And they're like wondering, man, is our food going to be, possessed, or is our food dirty, right? Because it said, do not buy food that has been offered up to idols. And these people had all kinds of weird beliefs, right? So just a thought. But anyway, so he says to her, give me a drink. And then verse 9 says, the Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? She's just making it obvious. Do you realize what you're doing? Jesus, you don't know what you're doing. You're being a little bit ignorant here, right? And then he answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. He says, if you only knew who I was, you would go gather all your sisters and brothers and go all work really hard to get me some water finally. Come on. No. Notice what he says there. He says, if you knew the gift of God, look at this in this translation. Jesus answered, if you knew the generosity of God, you would ask him for a drink. This is very opposite, isn't it? Here is a king that serves. Here's a king that gives. Here's a king that washes feet. The average king, when they would come into town, they'd say, if you only knew who I was, you would do everything. Like you guys would run and give me all your best. If you got leaders and people and religious institutions telling you, if you only knew who I was or who we are, you guys would do this and this and this and that, right? But Jesus didn't bring that to town. He brought this to town. He says, if you only knew the generosity of my Father, you would ask me to give. That's the very opposite thinking, don't you think? Man, if you only knew. He didn't have that mentality. Man, how dare you question me and not give me water right away? Just give me water, woman. Right? That would have been the mentality. That would have been the religious leaders of the day, or just an average, anyone. Because if a woman was just taught to run and do whatever they were told to do, right? They were basically slaves to the people. And then Jesus answered and said to her in verse 13, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. Notice how he says this water. There's not just like thinking, okay, this water. Jesus always brought out something, all right? He always brought out something. And it says, if you drink of Jacob's well, that's what the passage translates. It says the Jacob's well. He brings out this water. You go a little bit further back in the verse, he says, when Jesus tells her that if you knew who I was, you would ask me to give you water, right? And he's like, what do you think? This is Jacob's well. This is a very special well. This is it was like their special place, their kind of worship, kind of this Jacob from their ancestor. He says, and this well is very deep. And he says, do you think you're better than Jacob to have water that's better than Jacob's well? Because they thought the water was maybe so good because Jacob made this well. This is Jacob's well, right? So that's how a lot of people, they live and they have these forefathers, or they have this teaching. It says but this Jacob's well represented what? What does a well look like? Like what if you think of a well and you had to make your own well? I've made a well myself in Mexico. We've dug a well by hand. Anybody else done that in your life? Man, you need to do that and go to Mexico and do it there, man. You can't just dig your shovel into the ground and start. You had to get a pickaxe, pickaxe and a pick. You had to beat the ground, poke the ground, and we had to do it all by hand and dig a well, right? It was hard work. It basically, right, he says, if you drink of this well, you will get thirsty again. He was not talking about that, this water is just, and then because he was trying to get to her about something else, not just the physical water, right? Right? So he says, if you drink of this well, this teaching, this belief system, if you keep staying in here, you will keep getting thirsty. Your self-effort, your works, you're living in the past, You have to dig really deep just to get something out of life, right? He says, if you keep living out of this, if you keep living under the law, you will keep getting thirsty. The law will always leave you hanging with nothing, all right? Because it doesn't give life, it takes life. And it shows you that you don't have anything, you don't have what it takes, right? She says in that one verse, he says, do you really think that you're greater than our ancestor Jacob? Wow. Look, that sounds familiar, right? The Pharisees did the same thing. When Jesus said that I am the Father and I've been from the beginning, right? And he's like, what? You're older than Abraham? How dare you? And they worshiped Abraham. They worshiped and then instead of going to what Abraham said and what he was pointing to, they worship that, right? A lot of people, they worship the Bible instead of what the Bible points to. They're so stuck on a book and they want to go follow it to the T, but that book is actually introducing you to someone. And to who is it? Jesus. He's connecting you to Jesus. That Jesus pointed out to the Pharisees. He says that you search the scriptures, but you can't find salvation in it. You won't find it there because the scriptures points to someone that is life, right? Man. So what are the things that you're living by? What is the forefather? What is the thing that you're like, man, I can't let this go because this is the thing that I have to constantly draw from, but it's always leaving you hanging. It's never going to give you life. Right? Some people, they live in their hurts. They live in their past hurts, their offenses, right? They draw basically water from that. They're like, I can't let that offense go because it's kind of my source of, but it always leaves you dry, more thirsty. It's like a salty water. That's a lot of people love to live in that. But Jesus gives living water. He says, John 4, verse 14, he says, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty. But the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing, jumping, leaping up to eternal life. So she's just like, wow, what is going on? Like, this is weird water. Like, give me some of that water so I'll never have to work again. Like, this is just too good to be true. Like, she was still thinking about, man, I don't want to have to draw water all the time. That's a lot of work. Notice what it says in Isaiah 55:1. It says, come all you are thirst, come to the waters, and you without money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Jesus is offering you something very expensive, and then he says, come and buy it, and then he gives you the money so you can buy it. Boom, supports all the way around. He says, come, it's only by faith in Jesus Christ that you can be saved, right? By grace through faith. And then he says, come. But he doesn't inspect your faith. He says he gives you the faith, because that's why the Bible says it's the faith of God. It's not faith from like a level of faith that you have to, bottle up. No. He says, come to me, and I will give you faith, and then I'll give you what that faith gives you. Wow. It just supplies in every demand, like in every area. It's just fully loaded. Isaiah 58:11, it says, the Lord will always guide you. He will satisfy you in a sun-scorched land and strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring hose whose waters never fail. 2 Corinthians 9:8, it says, grace abounds in all sufficiency, that you will always be fully stocked to do every good work. Man, that's what a lot of people, they really desire that, but they're going to the well of Jacob, working really hard, digging really deep wells, and let's work hard to get some water out of this, and then one little drop. And then it ends up falling in the sand and disappears. It's no good. But Jesus says there's something that will spring up in you. What do you think about when you think about a fountain? Any thoughts? A fountain. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you see it? When you think about a fountain? When I say a fountain, huh? Flowing. Yeah. A river. It's just flowing. He says he compares it to an endless. Everybody, like you go to some spring water, like rivers. Like it flows all the time. Like, where is this water coming from? Where is it going? Why is it never ending? It just keeps going, right? And it's always fresh. Doesn't it sound effortless? Like you can just like sit there and do nothing, and it just, wow. That is just too good to be true. A lot of people think, that you're talking about comfort and being just in a comfort spot. You never have to get uncomfortable and everything. Like you can't do, there's no effort. Do you know what? There's more things that will happen out of your effortlessness and resting the fountain than trying. All right? So in John 4:17, okay, let's keep going with this story. He says, you have correctly said, I have no husband. So before I go into it, Jesus confronts her, right? He says, go get your husband. And she says, no, I don't have a husband, right? And then he says, you have correctly said, I have no husband, for you have 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This which you have said is true. Notice how the response there, I thought was very interesting. I thought it was something that Jesus sees everything through you. And a lot of people, it scares them when they hear that Jesus sees everything about you. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 14, it says, his head, he turns around to see the voice that's speaking to him, right? He has that revelation. And he says, the first thing he says his head and his hair were like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like flame of fire, right? When people read that, they're like, oh man, God can see everything. Flames of fire represents like he He burns through everything that's in front of you, that you might look good, all the shells that you're probably putting on. I'm doing good, all the walls you put, and Jesus just X-ray right through all that and sees you, right? And when people hear that God knows everything about you, then generally it's fear that brings up, right? But oftentimes when people do it in a way, it's not really that Jesus sees you, because when Jesus sees you, it's going to be a different reaction. It's not going to be fear. I promise you that. When I finally I knew Jesus could see me, but when I finally took to realize, okay, Jesus, you know everything about me anyway, the reaction was the opposite of fear. It's just amazing. And I thought that was interesting. Look how she says, I didn't even put it in there. But anyway, her reaction right away is like, I see you're a prophet. She's not like, oh no, I'm so sorry. Like, wow, you're a prophet. And that note, since you're a prophet, where do you think we should worship? Totally changes the subject. Forget about my husbands. Forget about everything that happened to me, right? It's just, I thought that was really interesting. And then she just has this question. Okay, we've had this long time of debate. A lot of people do that. I once wanted to share the gospel with someone, and it's just like, I thought he was paying attention. And the next thing we know, hey, since we're talking about the Bible, what do you think of this and this? And I'm like, you're not listening. I just told you, it was just a randomness topic about something else that didn't even matter at all. But he wanted to know about that right now. And I'm like, come on, listen to what I'm saying. I don't want to go into all those weird things in the Old Testament. He's just he wanted to know, doesn't the Old Testament say something about this and this and this and that? And I'm like, where did that come from? But anyway, just wanted to change the subject. So she changed the subject about worship, right? And I think Jesus was setting her up to do this. He intentionally wanted her to find this out, right? Because he exposes, or basically says what's happened in her life, sees her, right? And then she asks about the worship. Where should we worship? The Jews say we should worship over here, and we say we worship over here. We all got our ends. They had to build their own separate temples because they couldn't get along. So where do you think was the best place to find God, right? So what's the best church to go to find God? Well, which one? Let's go. Let's see what's going on. So he says, believe me, woman, that a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Now, notice something. He says, Father, and this is something she probably has never heard before. There comes a time you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Jesus introduces a whole new thing to her that she probably have never, because God was always like God up there, the one above. They always had different names. You never talked to him as a father, right? Even today, the word father has been distorted, right? What was the first thing that you hear when you think of when you say the word father? Right away, it's like authority, someone telling you what to do, how to live your life, or someone that's strict, someone that spanks you, or someone that's being, right away there's the idea, oh, he's authority. And that's not what Jesus was doing at all. Because Paul talks about it in Romans, he says, there's a spirit inside of us that cries out, Abba, Father, right? And it's nothing to do that Father as in, hey, God, you're all authority type of thing. That's not the picture at all when you're supposed to have when you hear the word Father. The word Father, when you hear that, you're supposed to find someone totally else. And that's what Jesus was trying to get at here. He wanted her to find out something about the Father, right? He says, there comes a time you will worship him somewhere else, not on the mountain, not over there. He says, righteous Father, I have made your name known. So Jesus talks about, in John 17, about the Father, and he says, I've made your name known. A lot of people that think that Jesus' main topic was money, or main topic was hell. He talked more about hell than he did about heaven, right? So we always debate, Jesus, we got to focus on the main thing that Jesus talked about. But you know what? Jesus talks about the Father. He brings up the Father, the word Father, 150 times. And that is he was the very first person that ever referred to God as the Father, right? And when he says the first time that they ever heard a prayer, the disciples asked him, so teach us to pray. Those people, because Jesus is rebuking how they're praying. He says, notice how they're praying. He says, beware of people that pray a lot. Beware of people that pray a lot. Wow, that would cut the prayer meeting a lot shorter if we would just realize that one. Quit your long prayers, useless, repetitious words that we often say because we make it so distant and so ritual, right? But he says, beware of this. So he talks about all that, and then the disciples are like, well, if we're not supposed to pray like those guys do, so teach us how to pray, right? And then he does that, our Father who art in heaven. He didn't say, our God that's above, He says, our Father. And that was something very new to the disciples, right? They had never heard that term before. So Jesus really talked about the Father. In John 12, he says, Father, glorify your name. Not saying that, hey, I want to make sure my dad, you know my Father, that he's like the authority of it all. No. Father, glorify your name. And how did Jesus do that? He served the people. He gave his life to the people. That's how he glorified the Father, knowing that you have now a totally different image of word Father than you ever have. Right? Because often when we hear the word Father God, we relate to our own fathers here on earth, how they treated us, and we translate it that way. No, we're supposed to translate it through Jesus. Jesus is your lens of what a father is like, right? And that's what he says, Father, I want everyone to know who you really are. And he says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So we've taken this where you're like, oh man, you got to get very spiritual. You got to get really in the Bible and really spiritual, and that's how you worship God, right? That's not, I think Jesus was making it a lot simpler than what you think, right? And the message says, those who worship him must do it out of their very being, their spirits, their true selves in adoration. Did you know that the Word of God, like when it refers to God as God is the Spirit, God is breath. When you're breathing, you're worshiping him in spirit. Because he is your breath. Every time you breathe, it's giving you life because he is breath. He is life. That's just how he is. And it's a lot closer to you than you think. Worship him in your own spirit, like in your true selves and who you are. That's what he was trying to get. And Jesus said to her, I am him. She's like, man, I'm waiting for that Messiah. I wish this would come true. And then he says, I am he, the one speaking to you right now. And then it just all clicked. It all clicked with her. Awesome, because she's starting to realize the Messiah is supposed to be delivering us, and then just all connects all the dots of what God was actually doing. Like God was redeeming. He's connecting us. He's becoming one with us. He's like God with us. Not God over there in that building or in that group over there. Like you don't find God over there. You find God where? Where do you find God? Yeah. Wherever you are, you find God. Because he promised to never leave you. He promised to go wherever. He says, actually, I'll go before you. He'll be there when you get there. When the Samaritan woman went to go work really hard to get a few drops of water, Jesus was waiting right there. I'll give you living water. Right where you're going to try to find your satisfaction in life or whatever, you're trying to work hard to ease that pain or to work really hard to justify your guilty conscience. Whatever people are doing, like they're always heading somewhere to a well to draw out of it, to draw a little bit of life out of it and to keep going. Try a little harder. Preacher smashes on the pulpit and says, behave, get your life in order. Come on, try harder, right? And then people get, oh yeah, I feel so condemned. That was a good message, We'll try harder this week, and they're going home and they're going to dig really deep. They're going to throw their buckets down and just extra deep, right? And then they come up with just dry sand, right? The law brings death. The law empowers sin. The law is actually what reveals sin more and more, and then therefore death, right? John 5, verse 25 says, truly, truly, I tell you, the hour is coming and has now come, right? When the dead will hear what Jesus just said. When the Samaritan woman heard, I am the life, I am the water, remember that time when Jesus says, if anyone thirsts, come to me and I will give you water to drink, right? And it actually says, they figure that where Jesus was, He was in Jerusalem where there was a river, a fountain, where it was just like it was just flowing all the time. He was standing right there, and he was using these analogies. He says, if anyone is thirsty, he would yell. He just randomly yelled, and he says, come to me, I'll give you to drink, right? And then he says, I am the light of the world. And he was standing there where in the city where they had this big candle, where there's this big light, right? And he says, I am the light. The things that you guys all around you, all the symbols that you guys are worshiping, he says, I'm actually he. Like, I am the one, I am that ending. I'm that fulfillment of whatever you're doing, right? He says, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. I don't think he's actually just talking about literally dead people. He says, the dead will rise. The dead will hear my voice, and they will live. All you got to do is hear one word from Jesus. The Samaritan woman just heard from the Father, just heard from Jesus, and she became alive. And do you know that the Orthodox Christians, they have actually a history book. They believe that this Samaritan woman, I forget what was her name, they have this whole story documented of what actually she did. She went into Samaria, right? Started preaching. And then they heard, and they're like, wow, they believed. But then they went and they heard Jesus for themselves. And then they're like, now we don't believe just because we heard her. Now we believe because we've heard you ourselves, right? So don't believe just because you heard me. Believe because you will hear Jesus for yourself. A lot of people, they stop at that person that they're listening to or whatever. They stop right there and they think, oh, this is it. This is where I stop. No. Because a lot of times the law, the way it's preached, this guilt and condemnation, it just ends with a person, a voice of a person. But the way it's supposed to be intended, when I'm speaking to you and I'm talking about Jesus, you're supposed to go home and hear Jesus for yourself. That's the whole point of preaching. I'm not here to tell you what I think. I'm here to introduce you to a Jesus, and I want you to talk to him yourself because you are one with him, right? We're not separated. And he says, you will hear and you will become to life. Man, that just makes it so much more easy. Like, it's effortless. Now you're not running around trying to get people to behave to change their life. They just need to hear Jesus. They need to hear one word from Jesus, and it will change their life. I only heard one thing from the Father, and he says, I love you. It was in a way that I can't explain. It was a hug that I can't even explain. I don't know how it was even possible, but it was just like he saw right through me, and I knew it. And instead of, and I was confused. I was like, I should feel scared right now, but I'm not. Right? It was kind of, you know that movie Nemo? You know, where they go really down, the depths in the bottom of the ocean. It's so dark, and then they can't see anything. All of a sudden, there's this light. And they're like, oh, this light is so, it makes me happy. Right? Instead of it being an evil fish behind it, the Father comes into your darkness and lights that light, and it will, like, instead of being afraid, you realize, wow, this is love. Like, I can't explain it. This is life. It's overflowing, right? That is what Jesus is doing. Jesus is what? Jesus is ending the us and the them. So when he went to Samaria, he says, there's no Jew, there's no Samaritans. There's no Gentile, there's no Hebrew. We're not different. There's not male or female. There's no difference. It said, I come to all of you and I speak to you all directly. You don't need to hear the one person. It's not an umbrella system. It's not a chain system. It's not an authority system. It's not this and that. He says, I come to you directly and I see you and I speak to you directly, and I am in you, right? I'm one with you, right? So that's, he just separated. When you start to realize that, then you're not looking at the world like, oh, the world and us. You just say, we. Churches have it so, like, we often have it so much a mentality that, oh, it's them and us, them and us. Like, they're, like if we're a totally separate being or totally separate gene of people, like man, that mentality needs to be broken. And in Jesus is serving drinks. He's serving you drinks, and it will be living water. It will in itself, when Jesus serves you a drink, that drink that you drink from him creates a new well inside of you, or a fountain that will just overflow. That's the difference with Jesus. The way he operates, he empowers you. He's not the one that's constantly asking you to give. who do you think you are? If you only knew who I was, you would serve me. That's not how he is. He says, if you knew how generous my Father was, you would ask me. Man, it's just so opposite, right? Jesus is empowering the least of those, and Jesus is speaking life, and Jesus is about family. The Fast and the Furious, Vin Diesel, it's about family, right? He's all about family. Jesus is about family. He made her family. Now, what I was getting at about the Samaritan woman, the Orthodox Christians, they have the story. She went back to Samaria and preached, but they have actually a story that they believe it is her. She changed that whole area. She preached, she became a pastor, and just changed that whole part of the country. There is this history book, there's these stories of somebody preaching and just changed, healing people and doing all these crazy things, and just, it just spread. And it was only, and then and even Nero was threatened by her. And she ended up getting captured by Nero and got, tortured and martyred. Because, back then, a woman was no threat, because they're oh, it's just a woman. Who's going to listen to her? It's just them. It's just that guy. Who's going to believe that guy? But she got the power of God inside of her and started preaching, and things got to change. And even authorities, the kings and the Neros, they all started getting scared. When is it that the authorities are going to start getting scared of us? Man, that's the power of God. And it's not that we're out to go and attack them. It's just because they will recognize there's an authority behind these people. They're who are they? Who's your king? Whose authority are you operating on? Who told you to do this? What's going on here? Right? And Jesus brings us on roads that you least expected. He's not telling you, run away from that society. Go to the one that, man, a lot of people, they want to pack up and live in the wilderness. I want to get away from this world because it's so evil and so dirty. They're all just losing their minds. I'm going to move away. You know what? When you have that, if Jesus will tend to send you to a place where, that's where he's taking his disciples. Go into the town, to Trudeau's house. Whatever. Some people just don't like the guy, right? So it's just man, Jesus is going to his house and he's serving him. He's blessing him, giving him life. Wow, I don't go to that town. Man, that's just good. Because Jesus wasn't about them and us. He was about giving life. He was about restoring. He's about everyone realizing the goodness of the Father. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to change. Man, we want to change people's minds about who they think the Father is. They think that he's distant, he's so far away, but he's right there. You can know the will of God. The biggest struggle people have, I don't know what God's will is for my life, especially Christians, the ones that are supposed to be close to God and know his heart, and they preach that Jesus is so loving and so close to you, he's always with you, he's in your heart, but yet they grow up believing that you can't know his will. You can know his will to detail, not just the big will that you need to go to heaven one day, to detail your daily things. He speaks to you. Man, there's things that we've experienced in our group where God was speaking. The Spirit was revealing things and warning us about. And I believe it's God. It's wow. And later on, it's just wow, now I get it. Now I know why there was these unctions, right? Yeah, and we need to allow ourselves to tap into that. So thank you, Jesus. We're going to sing another song.